Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Michael Downouter, and welcome to the Sky Evening News tribute to Debussy. Yes, folks, today is the celebration of Debussy's 146th birthday, if he was alive. Before we look into his music, let's look at his background. Now, Debussy was born in 1862, for those who didn't want to do the math, in Saint-Germain-en-Laye, which is close to Paris. His parents owned a china shop and his mother was a seamstress. His mother also taught Debussy a limited education through his childhood. Debussy began having piano lessons by a lady named Madame de Fleurville, who was a past student of Chopin. And thus his step to composition of history-changing music began. Now, Debussy was sent to the Paris Conservatoire in 1872 for 12 years to study the traditional Latin style of music and the composition of it. Debussy composed with many other significant figures of that era, like César Franck, aka the Modulating Machine. Debussy could be seen from the start as a gifted musician and was very talented, but he was also argumentative and experimental with the rigid teachings of the Academy. His professors looked down upon this. It would become apparent that even after all the awards he would get and the scholarships to further his study of composition, Debussy wanted out. When many asked and protested, he said, "I am sure the Institute would not approve, for naturally it regards the path which it ordains as the only right one. But there is no help for me. I am too enamored of my freedom, too fond of my own ideas." Later, he composed 4 pieces and sent them to the Academy. The Academy critiqued them as bizarre and hoped better for a gifted student. Little did they know of his effects his music would have on society today, for Debussy's music virtually defines the transition from late Romantic music to the 20th century modernist music. In 1889, Debussy was exposed to the Wagnerian opera and was heavily influenced by his pieces. Although Richard Wagner had died in 1883, his music and his cult group was still very much alive and was attended even by Debussy. Debussy did not admit that Wagner was an influence on him. Instead, he called him the old poisoner. Also in that same year, Debussy saw the Javanese gamelan play in the Exposition Universelle in Paris, which also influenced him greatly and brought about the pentatonic scales within his pieces. But Debussy's main influence was the Impressionist painters. Yes, it wasn't the music that brought about his genius, it was the painters. An Impressionist is one who tries to suggest or evoke meaning rather than flatly or simply describe. Debussy, like the Impressionist painters, would leave out the obvious or not include details and simply leave it up to the listener to interpret the music for themselves. A painter who influenced Debussy in this style was James McNeill Whistler. Whistler inspired Debussy's 3 famous nocturnes. Debussy used the whole tone scale to pentatonic scale, modal playing, and gamelan style in his music, and he played chords which sometimes float with no obvious direction. And his music was suggestively titled, not telling the story, but rather giving a platform for the listeners to flow on. All these techniques gave his music a dreamy, wishy-washy feeling, just like the painter's brush style. The style became known later as abstraction. Debussy was a nationalist. This was shown as Debussy sought to purify French music of foreign contamination, like the Latin traditions, which he very much disliked. What is the music of Debussy today? Debussy influenced the jazz music you hear today, and much of the dissonant and free thought music of today by simply breaking the rules and using music as a tool to grasp a feeling rather than to just tell a story. Claude Debussy died in Paris on March 25th, 1918, from colorectal cancer. He died in the midst of a German aerial and artillery bombardment of Paris during the spring offensive of World War I. What a way to go down with a country he loved so much. Well, that concludes our special evening tribute to Claude Debussy, an impressionist, a symbolist of music. Thank you for listening and have a good night, Planet Earth.